up for this talk. And what I will do is I'll tell you about some of the pieces of work that we do and try to connect them into one story to tell you about lives of dogs. And I think about halfway around the talk you will be convinced that dogs really live in the great Indian giant families. And then, okay, yeah, is that better? Okay. So I was saying that the title of my talk, as you can see, is The Great Indian Giant Families of Free-Ranging Dogs. So I'm hoping that by the midway of the talk, you'll be convinced that they really have these giant families. And then but at the end of the talk, I would like to convince you that we are also part of these giant families in some way or the other. So it's, of course, only a part of the kind of work that we do, but let me take you through this. So before I begin on the work, let me introduce you to my lab. So that is our homepage. Anyone who wants to visit the homepage, get more details about all the different projects that we are into. And I like to say that we peep into the private lives of dogs living on streets. So that's what we do. So the dog lab has no dogs inside the lab. Often people come and look around and say, where are the dogs? And I say, outside. So the lab actually has a lot of students. And this is just the set of people who have done PhDs and master's projects with us, or the current ones who are working on PhDs and master projects and postdocs. But then we also have always a lot of people doing internships with us, either in person, visiting the lab, staying there and doing work, or a lot of them actually work with us virtually from all over the country, because dogs are everywhere. And I tell them, you don't have to come here, be where you are, we will guide you virtually, get us data from your part of the country. And that is how we often get data from different parts of the country, which would be otherwise very difficult because you'll need a lot of money to travel and the time. So I think it works in a win-win condition for both the students who want to get experience and for us. And of course, the added advantage is when they get data which is meaningful. Of course, sometimes they don't, but when people contribute meaningfully to a project, they also get an authorship on the paper. So, often people ask me, why dogs and why stray dogs? So, some of you might be wondering, if I'm talking of stray dogs, why do I call them free-ranging dogs? So just to clarify, technically they are called free-ranging if they do not have owners. So any animal which does not have an owner can go wherever it likes. It's called a free-ranging animal. So all our stray dogs are technically free-ranging dogs. So stray is a very common term which we use, but stray is not a technically accepted term. And these dogs are not feral. Dogs which are feral are the ones who have really gone out of human contact. And you would find feral dogs in some forest areas where they have followed people and then not come back. And then they're going around in packs and hunting wild animals. And you see reports of these, and conservation biologists go up in arms saying you should remove all the dogs, etc., etc. So why do we study dogs? There are a few reasons, and I'll just take you through one by one. Of course, I think everybody accepts that dogs and humans have for long shared a very special relationship. So, they are the only animals who have been called man's best friend for, of course, some reason. And this relationship actually goes back a long, long way. So here are some examples. The first one, this clay dog, is actually something which was recovered in the Indus Valley. And you can see that it probably has a leash around its neck. So probably somebody's pet. So it is, some people say that in Indus Valley people had dogs as pets. Maybe they were using it for hunting. Of course, we don't have detailed proofs, but this is some kid's toy, which is a dog. This here is actually from a grave found in Germany, where a human skeleton and a dog skeleton were found together. So they were buried together, which again means that this person and the dog were definitely closely associated. Probably the dog was this person's pet or hunting companion. And here you see a cave painting where you obviously see a dog on a leash, and it is understood now that early humans have been using dogs for hunting companions for a long, long time. And such cave paintings exist in different parts of the world. This is from France. and a little more modern period compared to these, where you have medieval Europe, and actually dogs feature in many, many paintings across medieval Europe, be it as pets, or there are many paintings which you would see in galleries where city life or town life is being depicted, and you would see dogs on streets. So it is not that only we have dogs on streets. Across the world, dogs on streets have survived for a long time, and only in more recent times in the global north, countries have banned dogs on streets, and free-ranging dogs stopped existing in those countries. So now when we talk of dogs, people think of dogs as breed dogs. So 400 plus breeds across the world, and people take a lot of pride in owning a certain breed. They are difficult to maintain, and we have to remember all the breeds across the world are products of artificial selection. They are man-made, they are not natural. So people have taken dogs, bred them for certain features, just like people have done with horses to have more robust and stronger horses which run faster, or to make Jersey cows which give an insane amount of milk which cannot be required for a calf, or made different kinds of poultry chicks, or made different kinds of vegetables. So all the breeds that we see are products of artificial selection, and they actually, people have shown that across breeds there is very little genetic diversity because they all come from the original stock. But there is much more genetic diversity if you look at free-ranging dogs across the world. And of course, in the Indian context, what is this picture? What does it show? Loudly. Yes, Pandav doing what? Huh? Swarg ja rahe the. Bilkul. So Pandav on their last journey to heaven get followed by a dog, and the dog makes it to heaven with Yudhishthir and the rest of them don't, right? Of course, the dog turns out to be Dharma. That's a different question. But why I always show this image is because this is very typical stray dog, street dog, free-ranging dog, whatever you call it, very typical dog behavior. They will take a liking to a certain human and follow them, wagging their tail. Whether you give them food or not, they'll follow you. And sometimes they get into trouble because they get into another dog's territory and they are stuck there and cannot come back home, right? So people who are dog lovers must have encountered this kind of behavior at least one point of their time in life. How many of you have seen this? Yeah. So to me, this is very interesting because if this has happened, of course, this was known at that time, so people have put it in the story. So dogs, in their innate nature, have not really changed so much in the last 3,000 years, if you look at the time of the Mahabharata. And then comes this story, which I found on the internet, which was a newspaper report, about a dog which followed some trekkers up the mountains to a very, very difficult peak in the Himalayas in Nepal. So this dog just befriended this trekking team in a village in Nepal, and they kept kind of feeding it, and the dog followed them. And then they make it to the summit where they are sharing food with the dog. And of course, this is not a habitat which is ideal for dogs. The trekkers have a lot of warm clothing, the dog does not, but still it is there with them. So again, shows you to what extent the dogs will go to befriend humans. If you look back at the evolutionary history of dogs, or what is understood at present, is that wolf or wolf-like ancestors got domesticated through their interactions with humans and eventually became dogs. So dogs are technically, there are a lot of zoology students here, so dogs are Canis lupus familiaris, and wolves are Canis lupus lupus. So they are just subspecies, they are not even completely different genus and species. So they are very closely related, and there are often reports of dogs and wolves mating and producing viable offspring. So the history of dog domestication has a very close relationship with the history of humans. So we have actually co-evolved, and that is why they are very interesting, because they help us understand our cultural evolution to some extent. And if you look at this history, then we know that all dogs, no matter how different they look from each other, if it's a dog, it has evolved through the same process of domestication, and eventually people started breeding them and making them into the different breeds. And we also know now from data that if you take all the dogs in the world, then majority of these dogs are actually free-ranging. And so where are they? They're not just in India, of course. They are there in the entire global south. So in the world map, all the countries marked in red, which is the global south, countries in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, all have free-ranging dogs. There are free-ranging dogs also in some other countries like Italy. In Rome is famous for its dogs who interact with the tourists. Moscow is famous for its dogs who ride on the metro, etc. And then this entire population has a very high genetic diversity, which makes them a good system for studying adaptations, for studying their behavioral changes, whether they are linked to genes, all kinds of things. But then nobody studies them. A more recent paper published in 2020 in Science, where people tried to look at different old breeds of dogs and then looked at their gene share, and then they mapped it with human migrations. And what they really found is that dogs probably originated somewhere here in China, Southeast Asia, and maybe India, because they didn't have good data from India. And then there was an independent domestication event happening in Europe. And then everywhere else, dogs basically migrated with humans. So this is a very, very fascinating study, and this group is actually continuing to look at human migrations and dog migrations together. In fact, we are talking about a collaboration with them to look at the migrations of humans and dogs in the Indian subcontinent in the coming years. So now let's come a little closer to home. Dogs on our streets, they are always interacting with humans. All of us know that. Of course, they are free. Sometimes we restrict them, we don't like them in our premises, etc. But majorly biologically, they are free to mate with whoever they want, to go wherever they want, eat whatever they want. And they have interesting social lives. So when I started as an independent faculty member, I decided to look at dogs because A, I've always found them very interesting. B, I realized there's a lot of work going on in dogs where people take pet dogs to labs and do experiments with them and try to understand dog evolution without looking at a natural population of dogs. So I thought somebody should be looking at it. And thirdly, because I was trained in sociobiology, social animals were my interest. And so that the dogs fitted into this completely. So if you look at the life of a dog, of a pup, it undergoes a lot of experiences, interactions with different identities in its neighborhood. Of course, it begins with interactions with its mother and siblings, and then interactions with other adults in the group, and then different kinds of interactions with humans. Care and love, feeding, and then all kinds of torture that we put dogs through. So if you look at the dog-human relationship, there are people who will actively go feed dogs, who will provide dogs shelter on their premises, and then people who would pet dogs whenever they see one, show them some love, and then there is people who will be trying to kill all the puppies and neutering the dogs and putting them in pads and all kinds of stuff. Of course, though we love dogs, we have to remember that there is actually a lot of problems too. Dogs can spread rabies, they can bark at people, they can bite people. So there can be situations of conflict. Recent news actually has been there for some such situations in our country. And then there is this other thing that I have been talking about, that sometimes dogs attack wildlife, which becomes a problem in conservation. So we feel that we really need scientific understanding of the lives of dogs, of their behavior, of their ecology, if you want to reduce conflict and have a more inclusive coexistence with the species. So summing up, we feel that they are an interesting model system just for addressing different questions in ecology, behavior, evolution. We as people in the subcontinent, and then we as humans, have a long shared history of coexistence with them which has never been studied. And then if you want to reduce conflict, you really need to understand the biology of the species. And then, of course, from the perspective of practicality, they're there everywhere, living among humans, every possible human habitat they occupy. So it's easy to find them and easy to observe them, and you don't even need a hunting permit to go into the forest to do research. So at the Dog Lab, there are different aspects of the dog's life that we are studying. We are trying to understand how they interact with each other in terms of different behaviors like mating, parental care, interactions between siblings in a litter, territorial interactions between groups of dogs, and competition over food, space, mates. Then we are trying to look at how they interact with humans, where we are looking at humans as a resource and humans as a threat to their survival. Third category of things that we are doing is addressing the question of how smart are dogs. So we are doing various cognitive tests to understand their ability to solve various tasks, and these are done often in parallel to experiments people have done in pets, and we try to understand how this works in our condition. We try to look at ability to distinguish quantities, their food preference, and recently we have started looking at color preference in dogs. And so in doing all of these different projects, we try to contribute to building the big picture of understanding how dogs became man's best friend through this long history of domestication. In fact, it is, some people have found data which says that dogs were domesticated some 32 to 35,000 years ago, and some people claim that no, it's not more than 15,000 years ago, so that's an ongoing debate. So let me give you the first part where I'm going to talk about their social lives, and we begin with care that a pup receives from the mother. When we started this project, we thought that, of course, there is maternal care in terms of nursing, but then there would be other ways in which the mother is ensuring the security and survival of her pups, and that should begin by the choice of where to give birth, or the denning. So we have this divided up into two sections: pre-birth maternal care and post-birth maternal care. Now, if you compare this in the context of pet dogs, owners and breeders decide who mates with whom, and then when the pups are born, then they are taken care of from their birth to their, their feeding, their resting, their vaccinations, everything. There are people taking care of them. So the mother only is nursing for a few weeks, and then they are given off to owners, and again there are people taking care of them. But for the puppies, it's typically just the mother who has to do all of this, and we need to understand how good they are. So when we started looking at pre-birth maternal care, we were interested in the choice of dens, and we were asking that, do mothers actually choose dens which are good for the pups, and what are the parameters by which they are choosing these dens? Just to give you an example, these are dens which were found on our old campus, and these are all in people's backyards, my favorite being this abandoned sofa. So you can see that there is some level of protection, some enhanced protection in this case, where people have given them a little more shelter, or in this case where they have given some straw and plastic when the mother gave birth in this box, but typically they are first finding where to give birth. So what we did was we conducted a long study. We would find a litter, newborn litter, and then my students would go and actually measure different parameters of the site. What is, whether it is covered, whether it is protected from rain and cold, because typically they are born in winter, whether the place the inside is dark or lit, what is the dimension, the width, length, and the height, whether it is close to a place where the mother gets to eat, what kind of food she is getting, what is the source of food, is there a watering source, how much human disturbance is there in the vicinity, etc. So we had some 17 parameters, and we got these qualitative data which we then converted into a scoring system, and each den was given a score. Then we looked at the data. So here in this graph, the score that we gave increases in this direction, in this axis. In the y-axis we have the litter size. So the size of the litter born in that den. And then on the z-axis you have the number of dens with this combination of litter size and den score. And if you look at this, just by looking at the graph, you can see these are low. So there are fewer dens which have a low den score and a small litter size. They are so dens with larger litters typically also have higher den scores. So when we put all of this through statistical modeling, what we found was the combination of den size and access to resources contributed to selection of a site as a den. And interestingly, when we looked at what was this resource that the dogs were using, it is typically humans giving food. And this was very contradictory to what is known from other animals which live in human vicinity. There are numerous examples of animals which live close to humans or use human resources for their survival, but when they give birth, they try to hide from humans. They try to stay away from anthropogenic disturbance. But here, dogs were giving birth close to humans and using human-given food as their main food resource. It is a win-win for the mother, because when she has pups near somebody's house or in somebody's backyard, she just has to step out and the humans would give her some food. And typically when there are puppies around, people feel more caring, and people sympathize with the mother and typically tend to give them a little more food. Oh, she has so many puppies to feed. Especially women do this more, and that gives the dogs an advantage. They don't have to leave their puppies alone and go out foraging for a long time. Then we asked, is this an artifact of the way that we collected data? By the way, this was data from 105 dens collected over a period of 4.5 years. But still we asked, is the mother really putting an effort to find suitable dens, or is it like she's just giving birth wherever she finds a site? So my student Srijani actually conducted another experiment, rather study, where she followed pregnant females. So typically the gestation period is 2 months, and only about once they're 50% along their pregnancy, you start understanding that they're pregnant. So once we recognize that this female is pregnant, she would start following them every alternate day, and wherever they were seen to be digging and burrowing and sitting down and resting for a considerable time, this was identified as a prospective den site, and these measurements were taken. So we had multiple such cases where they would dig in a place and sit down and rest for long, and then 3 days later they'll abandon this for a new site. So there was the first place where we found them as the first den, then there were 2 to 6 intermediate dens, and then there was the final den in which they gave birth. And we scored these dens exactly the same way, and this data had 20 females which could be tracked for a 1 month period, multiple females which gave birth in between or died or had an accident, whatever, so those had to be abandoned. But for 20 females, we had robust data, so we found the den scores. And then when we looked at this, what we found is the first den had the lowest score on an average. Intermediate dens had an average score higher than the first den, and the final den always had a higher score than all of these, which means that the mothers are really seeking out good dens, rejecting ones that they had selected for a better den. So they are actually spending time and energy in finding a suitable site to give birth in, which means this is part of their care behavior for their puppies. So this gave us proof that, okay, our scoring system, by the same scoring system we are seeing this, so this makes sense. So just to show you some pups which have been born in our backyard, and this was the last year's litter which we actually seen being born. Here is this pup popping out, the second one, and then after that there were 5 more. Unfortunately, all of them, including the mother, had parvo and they all passed away. So now we look at maternal care post-birth. So this is work done by Manubhi Paul, my first PhD student. 22 mothers and their offspring belonging to 15 different dog groups, 5 years of data, where each litter is followed from their 3rd week of age to their 17 weeks of age, and there's a huge amount of on-field observations, 3 hours of observation per day for all of these puppies, and at least 3 days of observation per week, so that you have a lot of data. And then we look at the patterns. So first, again, if you look at this graph, this is the litter size increasing, this is the age of pups increasing, and here we plot the proportion of care that each pup in the litter receives. what this tells us is that the mother will not infinitely be able to increase amount of care in terms of time and energy if she has more and more pups. So after a point, the amount of care she can give in terms of, this is in terms of time, will saturate, and the care will be divided among the pups. So if you look at it from the pup's perspective, lesser sibling will be good, and the pups get maximum care in small litters when they are very small. And the care keeps decreasing as they increase in age. So for mothers, it's beneficial to have a big litter, because even if some puppies die with the same care, she can actually have some surviving pups. But then for the puppies, it is good to have smaller number of siblings, so sibling rivalry can start even at birth. When we looked at the kind of care behavior, there is active care, which is nursing, cleaning the den, licking the puppy clean, etc. And we look at passive care, which is lying down and letting curling around the pups, keeping them warm, or being there with them so that they are protected, where you are not actively spending energy in the care behavior. So passive care is marked in this dark green, which keeps increasing as the pups age, and active care keeps decreasing as the pups age. So the amount of time spent in care remains more or less constant, but the distribution of active and passive care behaviors keep changing with the pups growing up. And this is independent of the size of the litter. If you look at the different kinds of caregiving behavior, then this dark magenta is suckling, and then for example, this green is protective behavior. So as the pups grow older, protective behavior has to increase because they are moving around everywhere, and other dogs are coming in, and the mother has to run around protecting them. The yellow one is the play. Again, as the pups grow older, play increases. So again, what this tells us is of the total behavior in care given by the mother, she has to keep adjusting the levels of different kinds of behavior used for parental care depending on the age of the pups. We looked more closely at nursing behavior because that is the most energy intensive behavior, and we saw that there's a steady decrease in nursing effort as the pups are growing older, and 14 weeks onwards they have weaned completely. There is no nursing. Now there is a very interesting work on theoretical models of weaning conflict, because people have observed that there is a period, this was actually modeled for humans first, that mothers will try to stop nursing and infants will keep wanting to feed from the mother, which is known as the weaning conflict. So a theory called parent-offspring conflict theory was developed by Robert Rivers to explain weaning conflict, and after that a lot of work has been done in modeling to understand weaning conflict. But field data on weaning conflict does not exist in mammals. So if this plays, can someone just try playing the video? Yeah, thank you. Again, people who are used to being around dogs must have seen things like this. And often we have also seen people will grab the female, make her stop, and allow the pups to come and suckle from her. So this is actually weaning behavior, and this was seen quite often. So we tried to look at nursing behavior in a little bit more closely. So here, the triangles marked in red are nursing or suckling bouts initiated by the pups when the pup approaches the mother to suckle. The open circles are when the mother comes and lies down offering nursing to the pups, or she comes and stands patiently, allows the pups to nurse. So we look at each bout of nursing, who was it initiated by. So in the 3rd, 4th, 5th week, this is like 50-50. So both parties agree that pups need to drink milk from the mother. 6th week onwards, you would see the proportions initiated by the pups are higher, proportions initiated by the mothers are lower. 8th week onwards, it's more or less 100% initiated by the pups, 0% by the mother, other than a few outliers. 14 weeks onwards, 13 weeks is really the time when the pups are undergoing weaning conflict with their mother. And I always tell people, if you want to adopt a pup, please wait until they have weaned, because weaning is also known to have other effects on the pup's development. So this is a very, very critical time. So if you take them away from the mother, there is a lot of learning which they miss out on. So like pediatricians give, these timeline and the developmental milestones for children, we developed this maternal care timeline for the puppies and said up to 17 weeks we have high maternal care. Beyond 13 weeks there is only passive care. 7 to 13th week is where the weaning window is, and after 16 weeks the pups when the passive care starts, we call them juveniles, and then eventually they attain sexual maturity, which can be as early as 7 months. While we were doing, observing for maternal care, there are of course other adults in the group. And Manabi came back and said, there is something funny happening. Sometimes another female will come and lick the pups. The pups will actually nurse from this female because she has also had a litter. So we said, oh fantastic, there is alloparental care happening, so we should look at it. And that is where the Great Indian Joint Families come in. So when we looked at the data, 5 groups had received, 5 litters had received only maternal care. There were 3 groups which received maternal care plus care from another female, 3 which received maternal care plus care from a male in the group, and 10 which received both male allocare and female allocare in addition to maternal care. This one litter out here was the outlier, because here the mother actually had an accident and died the day after the pups were born. They were literally adopted by their heavily pregnant maternal grandmother who started nursing and had an abortion herself, and then she raised the pups like her own. So when we looked at the levels at which other females show care to the puppies, we saw allomaternal care levels are there throughout the lives of the pups, but then they are much lower than the open circles, which is maternal care levels, which made sense, If I am an aunt, I will show some care to my sister's children, but the sister is going to actually spend the most effort in raising them. So it is like that. But then we were curious, because why are they even allowing these pups to nurse? I'm not showing you this data, but let me tell you, what we found is allo mothers, moment they realize that the puppies that are nursing are not her own, they kick them off and run away. So they are actually undergoing this behavior called milk theft, which is actually known in herd living animals. It has been reported in deer, reported in giraffe, where there are a lot of calves and a lot of mothers all at the same stage, and all of them are moving, so the calves just nurse from anyone. But here it is not so. It is communal birthing which is going on, and the puppies are basically trying to make use of whichever lactating female they've come by, trying to drink some milk, and the females, once they realize this is not mine, she'll just kick them off and go away, sometimes even turn back and bark at them and even bite them. But now let us look at the putative fathers, as we call them. We did not know whether they were the genetic fathers, so we call them putative fathers. Just like I showed you, this is the maternal care graph in different colors. So similarly, we looked at what is this paternal care like. And what we found is the putative father's level of care is actually comparable to that of the mother, which was very interesting. And the way the mother spends different amounts of time with the pups growing older, the father also does this. And maximum of this keeps increasing, that becomes maximum is actually play. And when we did the statistics, we actually concluded that mothers are spending most of the time feeding, fathers are spending most of the time playing. So there seems to be a kind of sharing of responsibilities between the adults. Now if you sum it all up, Gitanjali, can you play that? This is again example of putative fathers for you. So, of course, guarding them, protecting them is one thing that they do, especially when the pups are older. Mother goes out foraging, father comes and guards. This is the most interesting. So the father just regurgitated and the pups are eating that food. This is very typical care behavior by the mother when the pups are like 5 months, 6 months old, 5 weeks, 6 weeks old, the mother starts, and then you see the father is also doing the same. And this is, of course, play. Okay, so now if you look at the pup, then it should really do good at surviving, because it has caring mothers. It then has female relatives which are showing care. So we actually saw that all the females who showed allocare were related to the pups, direct relatives, older sisters, aunts or grandmothers. And then they have a very attentive putative fathers. But when we looked at survival, only 1 in 5 pups born in the population survive. So it is not litter level survival, because some litters nobody will survive, some litters everybody will survive. But in the population in a given season, survival is actually 19%. So what happens is, if you look at pups in the population, October onwards we start seeing pups. January and February is when we see the peak, and then there's a drop. And this is pups of all ages. So some pups are being born and some are dying. When we looked at the causes, natural death was only 32%, which includes extreme cold, disease, worms, or another dog biting and killing a puppy, all of these. Human influenced and missing are the 2 categories. Human influenced would be accidents, poisoning, beating up. So actively people have done something to the pups. And the missing category is the most distressing, because often people take puppies home because they are cute and cuddly, and then when the pups are juveniles and they are like roaming all over the house and destroying stuff, because they also start tearing things up and making a lot of mess, people think, okay, now they are big enough, they can take care of themselves, they let them out into the open, and this is when they get attacked by older dogs and often get killed. Sometimes children pick puppies up and take them home. Mother says, no way, you're not going to have a puppy, and the child will go drop the puppy somewhere on the street, not return it to the mother. This puppy will not survive. And there are numerous cases of this. And so what really happens is these pups don't survive. So when we looked at the survivorship curve, highest mortality at the monthly level occurs when the pups are 4 months old, which is when they are 16 weeks, which is when they are becoming more and more independent of the mother. They are roaming free, a lot of accidents happen, lot of bites by other dogs happen. All of these start when they are in the kind of teenage part of their life. And 63% of the death is due to humans, contributing to a large portion of that 81% mortality. So now, we see here one way that humans are a threat, and in the beginning when I was speaking of dens, I told you that the dogs are really relying on the humans for their protection and food. So how do dogs actually make it in the neighborhood of humans? So the second part of my talk is about us and dogs. So this was the first real experiments we started doing, mimicking experiments people have done in pet dogs in more controlled conditions. So this is where we try to understand if dogs can follow human pointing gesture without any training, because it has been shown in pet dogs that they really need training to understand a pointing gesture, and they have to be trained when they are growing up to follow this. But we did these experiments with random dogs on streets, pup stage, juvenile stage and adult stage, and each of these stages we had like 50 to 60 data points, and then when we looked at the ability to follow pointing, we saw that pups have an inherent tendency to follow pointing, whereas for juveniles and adults it's 50-50, so they are not really showing this tendency. The way the experiment was done, you see these covered bowls. There is one bowl which has a piece of chicken. the other bowl which has been rubbed with chicken, so smells of chicken but doesn't have chicken, and it's covered by cardboard. This is done by one person who comes and gives puts these bowls down, and the second person who doesn't know which bowl has what comes and points. So it's randomized pointing, and it is done in the double blind. So the pointer actually has no clue what he is pointing at. And what we found is for only the adults, so we do 3 trials for each individual. So for only adults, the first time if they follow your point and get reward, then the next 2 times they'll follow your point. First time they follow your point and don't get a reward, the next round they will not follow your point. So there is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Remember, these dogs have never seen the experimenters because we go to different areas far away from the campus to do these experiments. First time they are seeing the experimenter interacting for 30 seconds and making a decision based on judgment. So this shows that they really are, deciding on their immediate interactions with this particular human, whether they will follow the instructions given by this human or not, which takes a lot of high cognitive abilities. We did another two sets of experiments where we used what in the literature is called complex pointing gestures, which again pet dogs find it very difficult to understand without training. One is called a momentary pointing. You see the bowl is being put here by Shagur, and then he points and removes the point and stands, and the dog comes and picks. And in this case, this is a distal pointing but constant. So the pointing in the earlier experiment, if you see here, the person was pointing to the bowl, very close by. So this is proximal pointing. In this case, the pointing is from a distance. So I tell, go there. And this kind of pointing, pet dogs find very difficult to understand. They will keep looking at the face and then looking at the hand and looking at the bowl, and they'll don't know what to do unless you train them. But what we found is, here our dogs on streets actually follow this at the level of the puppies in the earlier experiment much more than this. And we felt that it's probably because when I'm going too close to the bowl and pointing, the dogs are a little more wary of us than this. And on the streets, when you give food to the dog, you don't really give them very close to them, you throw. So that is probably the gesture they are used to. And that is why they are able to follow pointing when it is complex and not following it when it is much more simple. Then we said, okay, let us go into a little more practical gestures which people use on streets with dogs all the time. One is you bend a bit and say, I. In Bengali we say I, you can say tu, whatever, doesn't matter. But a friendly gesture calling out to the dog. A little bit of a threat, a dog comes to you, says, hey. So you just raise your hand. Higher threat, you show them a stick. So none of the dogs are actually hit or anything, just the gesture was done. And then for each dog, you do this gesture, and then you offer them, you call them and see whether they are coming. And then you give them a biscuit, and then you call them and see whether they are coming. So the first phase is called the social cue phase, and then second phase is called the food provisioning phase. So when we looked at the approach of the dog to the experimenter after the social cue phase and after the food provisioning phase, there was also a neutral cue where the experimenter does nothing and stands in the social cue phase. So for the neutral cue and the friendly cue, the neutral cue, very low approach without any cue, much higher approach when there is food. Friendly cue, when you call them, already approach is high. With food provisioning, it does not become significantly higher, but both of these responses are higher than in case of the neutral cue. So they understand the friendly cue. When we look at the low impact thread, hardly anyone comes to you after you raise a hand. But same dog, when you give food, many of them respond, though this response is lower than the friendly cue. And when you show the stick, they don't come to you even when you give them food. So the stick is something they understand as a threat. In fact, I tell people who are scared of dogs and who say, if I go on a morning walk, dogs bark at me and they chase me, I tell them just carry a stick. They'll be scared of you, they'll not come. In fact, we did this experiment again with groups of dogs, and we saw that the pattern holds, but there, even with the low impact threatening cue, with food, the response goes up a bit. So when they are in a group, they become a little bolder, and they still will come for the food if you give them, but just with the stick, they will not come. So they can actually understand human postures and intentions, and they respond accordingly, so they understand our social gestures. So right now we are completing a phase of very complicated experiments. IISER is looking at different combinations of posture. So one is just standing and gazing at the dog, standing with hand outstretched towards the dog, slightly bending, bending with hand out, squatting, squatting with hand out. And she randomly pairs with two of these gestures. So two experimenters wearing the same clothes. For 1 year when she was doing this experiment, both of them actually maintained the same haircut, and they would all go, both of them go to the field wearing the same set of clothes, and then one of them would give one posture, another would give another posture, and they will weigh out the postures against each other, see which one gets a higher response. So she has done a lot of these experiments, and what we found is overall squatting gives a higher response than just standing and bending. So just the raw data of this, you see here, bending already gives a higher posture than standing. Bending with hand outstretched gives a similar response. Squatting gives a similar response, but squatting with hand outstretched gives the highest response. So there are different hierarchies in which dogs would respond to our social postures, and we are still analyzing this data, but this is kind of the rough initial look at the data. This is one of my favorite experiments, where what we did is we asked, again, the literature says dogs will come to strangers for food and only then gradually build trust and allow them to pet. So we did this set of experiments some years back, where we put this circle here. This has a piece of chicken, and Shubro has another piece of chicken in his hand. And you just give this choice to the dogs, let them eat either from the hand or from the road. We record that as their first response. Then randomly, half the set of dogs are given another piece of chicken as a reward, and half the set of dogs are petted on the head, not given this additional piece of chicken. So this is food reward, this is social reward. Firstly, what we saw is when we do the experiment the first time, most dogs prefer to take the food from the ground, don't make contact with the hand. And immediately when we give the food reward or the social reward, the dogs which fed from the hand continue to feed from the hand, dogs which fed from the street continue to feed from the street. So this is change in the decision. This is no change in the decision for social reward and for food reward, and we see that these are not statistically different, so they don't change their choice immediately because you have given them a food reward or a social reward. Then we said, what about long-term interactions? So one set of dogs in different areas, individual dogs, were selected for a long-term data. Day 0, you give them the same experiment, the same choice, and crosses are the ones who ate from the ground, dots are the ones who ate from the hand. And then you go back on increasing gaps of days. So 1 day later, 2 days later, 3 days later, 4 days later, 5 days later, and every time you just go and give them this choice. So these dogs are given only food reward after they've made their choice. And 21 dogs were put to this test, and we saw that very few dogs actually ate from the hand, and they continued to hold on to this original response. 22 other dogs were subjected to social reward. So you go, make them choose, then you pet them on the head, come back. And you do this on the same days, and you see here, firstly, there was a higher response, and more dogs actually on day 1, they were eating from the street, on the ground. Day 2, they switched to the hand after they had received the petting on day 1. And we found statistically that if you give them the social reward, the chances of them befriending you is higher than if you give them the food reward. We followed this up with another experiment, where we combined 2 experiments of this kind. So one was a dog was asked to follow pointing, tested for point following behavior on day 1. Half the dogs were given food rewards for the 3 consecutive days. 5th day, their ability to follow point was tested. Another set of dogs again tested for point following, given social reward for 3 days, tested for point following or day 5. So this is the control where there is no social petting. Actually, there is no change. Whatever level of point following they showed in day 1 remains the same on day 5 when they have been fed. Dogs which have been petted, they show a huge increase. In fact, this is not drawn to scale, because if it was to scale, this point would go somewhere here. So they show a huge increase. In fact, all the dogs follow pointing. Interestingly, they stop showing negative reinforcement. So in this experiment, we did not do it in double blind. We purposefully pointed to the empty bowl. And every time the dog followed point, even when they did not get a reward, they still followed the pointing. So you can imagine the level of trust which can be built up with just 3 days of minimal petting to the dog and no food reward. So this was really interesting, because we actually showed that for these dogs, petting is a bigger reward than food, which actually makes adaptive sense, because if a dog is attracted to food, it can be easily poisoned or can be lured by food and beaten up. But dogs which are attracted to social rewards would actually survive better, because people who pet dogs are not at all likely to kill them. So befriending people who show petting is much more adaptive than befriending people who give food. Last 2 pieces of work that I'm going to talk about, we tried to understand how we influence their behavior in our day-to-day lives. So this study was conducted in different 9 cities across India, and where we looked at areas with very high human traffic, like railway stations, big markets, etc. Very low human traffic, quiet neighborhoods, and then intermediate human traffic, where there are like some shops, some houses, some offices, this kind of areas. And so this is just showing you human flux, high, intermediate, and low. And this is like this is like 80 individuals passing a site in 1 minute. This is like 30, and this is 10 or less. And we looked at approachability. So this is a very standardized test where you go call out to a dog and see whether the dog comes to you without any reward. So we saw that in both high and intermediate flux areas, dogs are more approachable when strangers go call out to them, whereas in low human flux areas, dogs are more wary. So they are not used to strangers, they will not come to you, and this is why when you suddenly walk into a quiet neighborhood, you will hear the neighborhood dogs barking. The chances that they'll bark at you are much higher than a dog on a railway station barking at you when you are passing by. And following up on this, we asked, what happens when there is a lot of human traffic and a lot of food? And the ideal situation for us was the Durga Puja, which in Calcutta is like a huge thing. So there are places where there are people on the streets for 24 hours for a period of a week, huge human footfall, and a lot of food. So huge crowding, huge food, because Bengalis and food go together. So there is food of all kinds, a lot of meat, lot of eggs, and other stuff. So then what does the dog choose to do? Does it hang around where the food is and avoid and put up being trampled and chased off, or does it avoid the food altogether? So what we did is, we know the sites where which attracts the heaviest crowds in the city. So 1 month before Durga Puja, we went and did sampling in these sites for numbers of dogs, group sizes, their level of resting behavior and vigilance, and we took GPS data on where each dog was and where the food sources were. We went back to the same places during Durga Puja, the peak traffic time, and did the same thing. We went back 1 month later and repeated the study. So the black boxes show pre-event 1 month before Durga Puja, open circles show Durga Puja time, and red triangles show 1 month after. And just by looking at this, you can see the blacks and the reds are all together. Statistically too, they are comparable in terms of dog abundance and human footfall. And of course, here human footfall is high, dog abundance, if you see here, is definitely much lower than this. And statistically too, dog abundance went down as human footfall went up. When we looked at level of vigilance behavior, we saw of the dogs that we saw noted, vigilance, which is marked in black, went up at least twofold at this time. In fact, we also saw that dogs were less in groups and more kind of isolated and sitting somewhere or standing somewhere being vigilant, not interacting much with each other, not interacting with humans, not going close to the food. So we concluded that the lure of high resource is not good enough. If there is a lot of disturbance, this is not going to attract the dogs. So in fact, we are following this up with another study now, which we are now in the state of analyzing, where we have done a similar study in fairgrounds, where again, people and food increases for a few days, and there we are actually taking data from the area around and finding that during the fair, dogs all around the fair area actually congregate to the fairground. So this is actually the reverse of what happens in Durga Puja. So we still have to look at the data in much more detail. So I'll sum up. I hope I've been able to convince you to some extent that free-ranging dogs actually have very active and complex social lives. So when we say, oh, poor dog, it doesn't have a family, it doesn't have a home, and we should take it home, it's complete nonsense. The street is its home, and it does have a family. Humans are a threat to their survival, but we are also the biggest resource point for them. They have very complex interactions with us, they are good at understanding us, and they have probably evolved this understanding over many, many generations because they've had a long enough time. And then a lot of our work is showing that lifetime experience with humans actually probably shapes personalities, which is evident from this flux data to some extent. And now we are doing more rigorous experiments to test this hypothesis. And this is what we feel, that in order to manage dog-human conflict, we really need to understand their biology, and we are just kind of scraping on the top of it right now. I would like to stop by thanking especially Geetanjali and the Department of Zoology for the invitation, and the university for getting me here today and giving me the pleasure of talking to you about our work. Of course, thank all our dogs who are such lovely model systems, and the various funding agencies who have been supporting our work until now, and I'm happy to take questions.
I have a first question to do with their evolution as pack animals initially, or evolution from pack animals, the fact that they have a hierarchy.
Again, right now we are doing some observations and experiments to look at hierarchies. The hierarchies we have tried for a long time. Using the standard methods in which people look at hierarchies, they are not so clear dominance hierarchies as in the wolves. But we feel that there are hierarchies. But I think this petting is completely the reverse. So in hierarchies, the alpha would be more aggressive towards the ones down the hierarchy. Here, it is something very, very specific to the dog-human coevolution. So this is like a, in fact, there are studies on pet dogs which have shown that when dogs and humans gaze at each other, both release oxytocin, which gives you this good feeling, and that is why, and there are now studies which have shown that dogs have evolved this typical eyes with some muscular changes have happened. One gene was modified somewhere down their evolutionary tree, and that's which is not there in wolves, and that gives this puppy eyes, which give a lot of emotional response in humans, which triggers this oxytocin release. So it's a very complex situation.
Of dog attacks on humans. So what are your views on that, and what are the possible causes for it?
Okay. None of these cases have happened where I have been there, so I don't know the past history of that area. But one thing that I have seen in general is that during COVID times, when there were no people on streets and dogs were roaming free, there has been a kind of change, and in many places dogs were not getting enough to eat because eateries closed down, so the garbage went down. So there was a lot of dog-dog aggression also happening. So it could have been that their interactions with humans have changed at that time in some areas more than others, and these dogs have already become aggressive. What we see is that when there is a lot of food, the group sizes can increase, and they will then start fighting among themselves, because naturally when the group increases to beyond a certain size, they will migrate and go away. So when there is a pocket in which people are giving extra food to dogs, more dogs will be lured to this as a high resource point, and then they are going to be fighting among themselves to capture this as their territory. So that can itself increase aggression in that area, and these dogs would already be more aggressive. Reports from remote areas where dogs have followed tourists and then been left out show that these dogs actually acquire a hunting instinct and then they go hunting. So again, if there have been places where there was nobody feeding dogs and the packs have remained, then they would have naturally triggered their hunting instinct, and this could be the reason why more attacks are happening. The third thing that we definitely see is dogs which get a lot of negative interactions from humans are more scared, and scared animals are more reactive. So it could be a mix of all of these. So it really depends on what is the background of these particular dogs which are attacking people.
We have many dogs in our university campus. So how can we take care of them?
My standard response to people is dogs have survived without us taking care of them for centuries. Just let them be, they will take care of themselves. Problem arises when there are a set of people who are over caring, and then all the puppies born in the litter survive, then the population increases, then you go neuter them, sterilize them, try to control the population. That is what is allowed legally, so people do this. But then as a biologist, I would also ask you to all ponder, what is the function of a living being? If you think about it philosophically or biologically, eventually we are supposed to leave behind copies of our genes, right? As into a living dead, because it cannot propagate its genes anymore. So it's a biological entity without a biological function, happens to be there because we want it to be there and we want to take care of it. So that is, for me, humans playing God. And in fact, I think a lot of problems in the world today that we are facing is because we have been trying to play God and claiming the whole world, earth for ourselves without sharing it with another. So coexistence, and also you think about it, what has been our culture? Leftovers after a meal, you go throw out, the scavengers will eat them, right? You don't give extra care and make extra food and feed all the scavengers, but you also ensure that the leftovers go to the scavengers. That has been the Indian culture. And if there is a mother giving birth, you will probably, ensure that the puppies are okay, maybe give her some extra food for a few weeks, and sometimes somebody will even give out some rags to keep them warm. That is the level of care that we have shown, and they have done well with that level of care. That is good enough. At most, to protect ourselves, we can decide to give dogs on a campus and rabies vaccine. Fine. Of course, as dog lovers, we feel bad when we see puppies die. But then if they don't die, remember there is over-reproduction. So natural control will bring down the population. If we make everybody survive, then only we have to handle the problem of too many dogs and how do we take care of them. So either way, if we don't go kill them, if we don't go beat them up, if we don't go take extra care of them, the population will handle itself. I mean, they have survived bullock carts to electric cars without us teaching them anything, right?
So so I was telling her about Miss Briganza, that she has, I think she must be 1.5-year-old, and she's had her first litter. So I said, now the students are very worried about her and they want her neutered. But then it's exactly what she pointed out. We are first overpopulating them, then reducing the population, and that is truly playing God. So maybe, yeah, objectivity. Any other questions?
Ma'am, so my question is, around my department, I am from Department of Zoology, dogs start digging. So is this behavior is for protecting their pups or
that is their natural behavior. Okay. They would like to dig and make a burrow, kind of hole, and lie down in it to keep themselves warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and they will also dig to give birth.
Oh, thank you. And my question is, many people do not prefer to feed them with the chocolates and the sweets. They say that these are harmful for them. So, ma'am, what could be the reason?
Again, information from pets that sugars are not good for dogs. I know a dog which recently passed away, one of the puppies born on the campus, which was adopted by my colleague's daughter, and they shifted to Kolkata for her high school. The dog went with them. She was called Safira. She used to be roaming free on the campus, but then coming into their house to sleep and eat. So it was like a semi-pet. And when she had pups, they took care of the pups and kept them inside for some time, etc., etc. So Safira used to be mad about sweets. You're eating chicken, if she's not hungry, she'll not even look at you. You're eating anything sweet, wherever she is in the house, she'll come running and paw you until you feed her. So she ate cake, rasgulla, sandesh, whatever you name it, and she never had indigestion, she never had fur falling off. Our dogs have a much more robust stomach, they'll digest everything.
Ma'am, one more question I have. Many dogs becomes mad and they start to bite other dogs.
When they get rabid.
What is the cause of that?
So that is when they get rabies. If dogs get rabies, the only way you can help them is by putting them down, because there is no cure.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, how does the hello mother recognize that whether the puppy is her or not?
Very good question. So in these dogs, we haven't been able to test that. But what is known from many animals is that mothers recognize their offspring by the smell. And dogs have very, very sensitive noses. They have 2.5 billion receptors on their tiny nose. So, of course, they can smell their puppies out from the others.
Ma'am, pheromones?
Pheromones, and the entire body would be smelling of, even human babies, they have a very typical smell. Yes. Right? So, in fact, it's known that human babies associate with the mother through A, their heartbeat, and B, their smell. So, smell has a very important role to play in animals.
Thank you.
Human babies get killed is increased day by day.
So that's exactly what he was asking, right? Lot of dog attacks are happening.
Due to the aggressive breed like bulldog and all. So how can we check it?
Yeah. Pit bulls are a very different ball game. I'm not even talking about them. Why people should have bulldogs is a good question. In many countries, bulldogs have been banned because bulldogs have a lot of medical issues. In fact, I didn't know. Apparently, the panting that bulldogs do, which people think is because they're aggressive, is because they have perpetual asthma. Because with the breeding, their entire nasal passage has been distorted to such an extent that they cannot breathe normally. So they are suffering. That's why they are panting. Bulldogs cannot mate because their reproductive system is all distorted. So they have to be artificially inseminated. Bulldogs can no longer give birth because their birthing canal is all distorted. So they have to be delivered through C-section. And then bulldog, there are apparently bulldog vets, bulldog specialist vets who make a lot of money out of this, and every bulldog needs to be taken for healthcare very often. So now many countries have actually declared that bulldogs are total torture. They cannot be kept and bred anymore. So in Europe, a lot of countries are banning bulldogs.
Professor Anindita, this was a wonderful talk, and we are all, I think, everyone is really enlightened. In the beginning of your talk, you mentioned this: we should not separate the pup before the weaning period, right? I just want to ask, what are the differences or the behavioral changes we observe if we separate the pup before weaning period and after the weaning period? Do we see any
Frankly,
changes?
for free-ranging dogs, we've never studied that because we don't do that kind of intervention and biological disturbance to them. So we only observe them and do very non-invasive experiments involving food and petting. What we have seen in other experiments is that, or through observations, is that mothers would give them regurgitated food it's almost like we introduce semi-solids to babies. Then mothers would bring whole food in their mouth and drop it in front of the pup and make them eat. Then they would actually take the juveniles out with them and literally show them how to look for food. So all of this learning starts during that weaning period, when the mother is actually rejecting them nursing, but then taking them, bringing them solid food to eat. So all of these kind of learning with the mother, and then with other adults, they go out foraging. So we see that juveniles will typically be taken along by the adults when they go foraging. So this is their social training which is going on in this period, up to this 4 months of age.
Yes.
So that is a very critical period for them. And also when we do these cognitive tests, we see puppies really know nothing. They will follow pointing, they will eat anything. In fact, you give them non-edible things, they'll chew it, not because they're trying to play, but because they're trying to eat. And actual training of what to eat and what not to eat happens at that stage.
Yeah. So, but can't we do the petting things? I mean, if we separate the dog before the weaning period, and whatever the things you are telling, aren't we teaching them these things, those who are petting the dogs?
We are teaching them the way we think dogs should live. We are not teaching them the way dogs should
in their natural system. Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you.
And दूसरा क्वेश्चन मेरा एक जर्मन शेफर्ड से रिलेटेड है. वन ऑफ माय फ्रेंड है जर्मन शेफर्ड. उसको मैं बचपन से देख रही हूँ, जब से वो आया उसका जो बिस्तर है उसको वो सक करता है, अभी भी वो करता है ऐसा. तो ये क्या रीजन हो सकता है इसका?
एक तो है कि chewing is a very natural instinct. They'll chew toys, they'll chew other things, object chewing that they keep doing. So they like to play with things even as adults. In fact, if you're from zoology, you would have learnt about neoteny, right? So this is a neotenic behavior. So puppy-like behavior which is retained in adulthood, which is considered to be one of the outcomes of domestication. So dogs chew things, that is a normal thing. And about your first question, whether it is good for their health, as I said, if you're talking about dogs on streets, they'll eat anything. In fact, they love eating poop.
Yes.
Right? Diapers are their favorite. So it is a lot of nutrition actually. You know, we say yuck, but it's actually a lot of nutrition. Lot of undigested, semi-digested food. And then old poop has also a lot of insects in it, so a lot of proteins. So we think it's yucky, but it's good nutrition for them. They love eating cow dung,
Yes.
not the fresh one. Slightly old one with the solidified layer on top, with the crust on top. They'll break through the crust and then eat it. You know, Parle-G would have gone out of business if people didn't use them to feed dogs.
Thank you, ma'am.
Shops around us would have gone out of business if Parle-G was
You know, in IISER when I was doing my PhD, a dog came and adopted us. One fine day it turned up outside our house and refused to go. It was raining outside. And we were students, right? We were not cooking at home most of the time, so we didn't have anything to feed the dog. I didn't even have biscuits. What I had was a packet of mudukku, which in Bangalore is called chakli. So I was like, I wanted to give it something, so I offered it a chakli. And it was so happy, it just kept wagging its tail and asking more. It finished a whole packet of chakli. And we named the dog Chakli. So Chakli used to follow me, my cycle to my lab, which was 2 kilometers away, across the campus, across other dog territories, steadily following my cycle. She would go and stay inside the lab. RG got a rug for her, you know, one sack. So it would be under the almirah. She would pull it out and sleep next to my chair. The entire department, whoever went to have tea, coffee, would come back with a small packet of Parle-Gs. At one point of time, my table had a stack of Parle-G, like shops. Everybody would bring Parle-G and give it to Chakli. Whole day Chakli survived on Parle-G, and she was a really healthy dog.
Thank you.
Only at night when we went home, we ate dinner, we would give her rice, chicken, whatever. If we went out to eat, we would bring back bones for her. But other than that, Chakli ate Parle-G. Lab meetings, we would get tea, coffee, biscuits. For Chakli, a whole packet of Parle-G would come.
Thank you, ma'am.
1 लीटर में जो डॉग्स और डॉग्स की इंटरेक्शन होती है, राइवलरी या कुछ, तो वो भी एक सिग्निफिकेंट रेट का रीज़न हो सकता है.
Of course, that is all part of their social learning. In fact, right now we are trying to do, we are gathering data. What we are trying to understand is this early life interactions, how do they influence their late life interactions? whether there will be bonding more with some, bonding less, whether it will determine which dog will have to leave when the group size increases, all of these. Problem is you start observing pups and they all die, so the data is gone and you start all over again.
My question is, what are the direct or indirect consequences of neutralizing all the free-ranging dogs in a country, like it is done in Japan?
They are a very small country. I don't think we'll ever achieve it just because of the sheer size and numbers. But yes, if you want to neutralize all the dogs in the country, you should also take care of all your garbage, ensure that you have taken care of the rat population and the cockroaches and other things, because they are a part of a big ecological network. In fact, one study which I didn't present here, we tried to look at the scavenging community in different habitats. This was work done during COVID, so we would dump food and keep the camera open for 1 hour and see who all comes as scavengers. We didn't see a single rat, not because there are no rats, but because the dogs are there. Birds come, they eat bits, but rats don't come because the dogs are sitting there. So if you removed whatever all the dogs, eventually you will have to have the Pied Piper situation where you will then have to deal with the rats. If you removed all the rats, then you'll have to deal with other creatures, smaller invertebrates which you don't want. So the prey-predator system, everything is in balance because of the food web. So they are part of the food web.
And my second question is, ma'am, what are the cases of passive smoking or passive causes of, like a pet owner is a smoker, heavy
passive smoking?
Yes, ma'am. That case is that if a pet owner is a smoker, heavy chain smoker, and
I guess it will affect the dog's lungs as badly as they affect our lungs as passive smokers.
I could answer this simply because dogs are used very commonly as a respiratory model when they're used as a model for respiratory drug studies. So if you are doing trials for respiratory drugs, you use dogs as a model. Alright, which means that they share quite a similar respiratory system to us humans. And therefore, they would suffer the same kind of damage.
Yeah.
Ma'am, that female mate with 2 different males in a season. So, ma'am, is there any behavior that we can say cryptic female choice they perform?
Nice question. In fact, right now I have a student who has started working on this. We are trying to look at if there is mate choice. These are promiscuous breeders. All individuals mate with multiple partners, but we don't know whether all of these matings are successful in terms of giving offspring. So I've been wanting to do the genetics for a long time, haven't found any geneticists who are interested to collaborate with us yet. And secondly, in terms of the behavior and choice, that's something that we have just started.
Thank you, ma'am.
People other than zoology, are there people other than zoology here? Good. So a few of them, we hope to bring back Anindita many times. And we hope, what is interesting is how Anindita has come here. So she had been invited by IIT Kanpur, if I'm not wrong, to begin their animal welfare society, right?
No, they had a society,
they had an animal welfare
but now they are trying to start awareness.
So they have an animal welfare society on campus, a formal society with collaborated efforts which works on animal welfare. And but there were a lot of issues with dogs, a lot of strong emotions regarding dogs, both pro and against. And they decided that an expert should come and talk and clear the cobwebs. So that's how she was here, and I had told her that anytime you're in the vicinity of Lucknow, you have to come in and interact with our students. So she very kindly came today from IIT Kanpur. She'll be here today, then she'll leave tomorrow early morning. So, I know that there are many dog lovers. In the campus, I see, I have a whole set sitting right in front of me in my lab. I have to push the dogs away from my lab steps every day, especially when it's raining. They want to come inside and sit. They are all, my students actually get pedigree for them.
They don't like it.
So they get pedigree from them.
I'll tell you what my students did during COVID. Not just my students, actually dog lovers on campus, some of them who were on campus, PhD students, they volunteered to give food to the dogs because the mess was closed, right? So what they would do, they would get rice, some dal and eggs. And even now, if there is a a litter which is born and the mother is ill or something, that's what we do. We overboil rice and dal together, make a khichdi and break some couple of eggs in it, mix it all up, protein, carbs, everything together. That is what you give to the dogs and they lap it up.
And so I think, and I also see students coming in from different faculties to our department to feed and play with the dogs. I see that happen almost every day. So it would be nice if you all are such dog lovers, maybe you all as students could come back and think of putting up an animal welfare group in a more formal situation, and if you really want to do work. So a more formal setup would be something that you may think of taking an initiative as. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Anindita. It's been a pleasure, and thank you all. So hope to see you all back.